For the third straight season, the Cleveland Browns came into the year thinking that Deshaun Watson was going to be their starting quarterback for the entire season. And for the third straight year, he lasted less than half the season and ended up making the trade look even worse than we already know it was. And I'm not going to sit here and talk about how terrible that trade is because everybody already knows that. But it just is the fact of the situation that this is now the point in time for the Cleveland Browns where they've seen these last 3 off seasons kind of go by and not address that quarterback position because they felt like they had Deshaun Watson. They had the guy of the past, well, not the past, but of the present and the future. Even though Cleveland made the AFC wildcard in 2023, the 3-year run as Deshaun Watson as a Cleveland Brown have been pretty embarrassing for Cleveland, and it was capped off with a 3-14 year this year. They had easily the worst offense in the NFL. They didn't have a very good defense, and really the best thing that you can say about this team is that it was good to see Nick Chubb come back from his injury. It was good to see Jerry Jeudy get his first Pro Bowl, and that's really it. And I do give the Cleveland Browns at least a little bit of credit from their ownership standpoint. They have literally come out and said that the Deshaun Watson trade, they thought they were getting the guy of the future. They thought they were getting a guy to help bring a Super Bowl to this team, and they were wrong. And they've been very candid about that. And like I said, you have to give them credit for at least calling it how it is with what the situation is. And I applaud them for taking accountability and saying that they were wrong. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into the off season that Cleveland had this year. I'm going to start with the re-signing of Myles Garrett. I already made my own video about this, but I think this was something that Cleveland had to do, and the fact that they were able to get it done without him, completely holding out and forcing a trade to somewhere. I really think that Cleveland did a good job keeping Myles Garrett there. Trade-wise, the only move that the Cleveland Browns made so far this year is trading Dorian Thompson-Robinson and a 5th-round pick to Philadelphia for Kenny Pickett. I didn't really understand the move. I felt like Dorian Thompson-Robinson fit with Cleveland pretty well, and I think he actually fits with Philadelphia pretty well, and that's why it doesn't make much sense to me because it seemed like a scheme fit for Philadelphia to get DTR and trade away a guy in Kenny Pickett that didn't really fit with what they wanted to do from an offensive standpoint. And so I don't get how you have to include trade or draft compensation to do something like that. But it's not really a huge move either way. It's not like it changes the fortunes of Philadelphia or Cleveland making this trade. It just seemed a little off to me when I saw that this was the move that was made. Moving forward to actual free agency, the Cleveland Browns re-signed a couple players in Tony Brown and Devin Bush. And in terms of bringing new talent to the team, they bring back Joe Flacco to be a possible backup starting quarterback for this team. They bring in guys on the defense that can help possibly in the pass rush, like Jerome Baker, Joe Tryon, and Malik Collins. And you get some decent players offensively. DeAndre Carter, who's going to slot in as a number 3, number 4 receiver, as well as probably your kick returner. And you get Cornelius Lucas and Tevin Jenkins on pretty, I would say, pretty cheap deals to be possible starters for this offensive line. And overall, I think with the money that they spent, I don't know about spending $20 million on Malik Collins, but other than that, all of their deals they made, like Joe Tryon's a young player. To get him for less than $5 million is great. DeAndre Carter can be a very decent kick returner for you. To get him basically on a veteran minimum deal, that's a pretty good job from Cleveland. Cleveland is losing a lot in free agency this year. I'm not going to say it's, just groundbreaking that they lose Jameis Winston to the New York Giants, but I do think that it is, he was the guy that was kind of helping turn around the vibes of this team last year. Even though they still weren't winning many games, any games, if anything, it still was a guy that they, I think, liked having around. You lose Dalvin Tomlinson, who is probably one of the best interior pass rushers and interior players on either side of the ball in the NFL. James Hudson is a decent tackle in the NFL. And you lose some guys like Juan Thornhill, Michael Ford, and D'Anthony Bell, who were solid rotational pieces in the secondary as well. In D'Anthony Bell's case, he's a solid player in the special teams game. So, I mean, nothing crazy for losses other than Dalvin Tomlinson. I think that is a big loss. But you're still in a pretty good spot with what your roster looks like currently. And so that brings us to the draft for the Cleveland Browns. This is a spot where Cleveland has had a rough go of it the last 3 seasons. They haven't had a first-round pick since 2021, so you do give them, I guess, a little bit of slack as far as the draft is concerned, but the same group that put them in that position is the same group that's drafting. So it's not like it's just some woe-is-me situation for Cleveland. They are the reason they're in this mess the last 3 years for the draft. The only guy that they've taken in any round in the last 3 years, the only guys that you really can say that you can rely on are Martin Emerson, Jerome Ford. You can kind of say that about DeJuan Jones, and you can somewhat say, hopefully, Michael Hall is a reliable player. But those are really the 4 or 3 guys that you can say you can rely on from these last 3 years of drafting. Not a good recent track record for Andrew Berry, Jimmy Haslam, and the rest of the Cleveland Browns organization. So, we look at this year. We've got 4 picks in the first 3 rounds. We have 10 picks overall for Cleveland. And the number 2 overall pick. There's a lot of hype around one of the quarterbacks, either Shedeur Sanders, either Cam Ward, depending on which one Tennessee takes, which I think at this point it's probably guaranteed it's going to be Cam Ward, at least with how it's been reported the last few weeks. And so you are looking at your choice between probably Shedeur Sanders, Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, Will Campbell, or insert other top 5, top 10 name here. You could also trade the pick back. And this, Cleveland, yes, they do want a quarterback. I don't know if Shedeur Sanders is the right quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. And for that aspect, I would be fine with trading back if he's the quarterback that's available. You trade back with a team like maybe that wants to give you a haul, like Pittsburgh. It would be weird for Cleveland to do a deal with Pittsburgh to hopefully give Pittsburgh their quarterback of the future. But if Cleveland doesn't believe in Shedeur Sanders, then I see no reason why trading the pick to Pittsburgh would be a terrible idea. But maybe it still is. I don't know. To be completely honest with you, I would way rather rebuild this offensive line than just try to force a quarterback into this situation. Because when you look at the cap for Cleveland, you have 4 starters who are going to be free agents at the end of this year in Wyatt Teller, Joel Bitonio, Ethan Pocic, and Tevin Jenkins. And 3 of those players are guards. So one of them isn't playing. You only have Jack Conklin and Cornelius Lucas, as well as DeJuan Jones as guaranteed tackle options for the next 2 to 3 seasons. At this point, I would way rather build up the offensive line. I would trade back if I'm Cleveland. I would keep building up with guys like possibly Will Campbell, or whoever else they believe is a top offensive lineman available. That's how I would address this team. If they stay and Abdul Carter is available, I'm just taking Abdul Carter because, for one, we're losing Dalvin Tomlinson, and so we don't have as good of a pass rush. We don't have as good of a defensive line. And Abdul Carter isn't just a pass rusher. He proved at Penn State he can do more in the passing game in terms of dropping back into coverage. And he's a good player, period. You don't have to just label him as a pass rusher. You don't have to label him as just a run stopper or or a pass coverage guy. You can simply just call him a really good football player. And there's a lot of really good football players in this year's draft. I think Abdul Carter is the best of them. And so getting him at number 2 would be immense value, in my opinion. Especially with how I feel there are a lot of second to fourth round quarterback options, like Jackson Dart, like probably Jalen Milroe, like a Tyler Shuck, like a Jackson Dart, if I didn't already say his name, Will Howard, Dylan Gabriel. There's a lot of guys that are going to be available in those rounds 2 to 4, even up to round 5, I think, that you could easily say could be, just a throw them in there guy and see if they have something. I think Tyler Shuck had his value really improved since the end of the year through the scouting process, through the combine, through the Senior Bowl. Will Howard was the national champion. Dylan Gabriel led an incredible offense and had one of the best careers in FBS history at the quarterback position. Jackson Dart has all the physical tools you want. You have these guys that are going to be available in those day 2 and day 3 rounds where you don't have to force a quarterback at the number 2 pick. You can just get the best player available. The Cleveland Browns, to me, get a B+ for this year's free agency. Like I said, I really enjoyed seeing them re-sign Myles Garrett. And I think the signings that they did make, even though they didn't sign anybody that was just like over the top, an incredible game changer for this team, they didn't give out crazy money either, other than the Malik Collins deal, which, again, I didn't really agree with $20 million for Malik Collins. But if that was his market, that was his market, and I'm not going to really make that big of a deal about it. They didn't do anything that you can say like sets back their books a few years. The only thing at this point that they're waiting on are for Deshaun Watson and some of these other guys' contracts to actually come off the books. And so, like I said, in my opinion, it's a B. It's nothing incredible, but it's also a solid free agency period. It sets their team up for the draft pretty well. They can do whatever they want. And they have the face of their franchise around for a long, long time after this year, hopefully into his retirement with Myles Garrett.